Well, hello there, humans, hippies, earthlings, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and if you're lucky enough indeed to be doing it too. I'm Bushka Blitz, and today I'm going to be talking to you about that filthy thing, that thing that you'd rather be seen and not heard. That's power creep. We're going to talk about power creep, and we're going to talk about that through the prism of the T-44. The T-44, once upon a time, was the creme de la creme of Tier 8 mediums. It was one of the strongest tanks in its tier, and it was one of the reasons why you go up the Russian medium line. You get the 62A, which was just OP as all hell. You get the T-54, which was probably pound for pound the best tank in the game at the time, and you get the T-44, which at the time was an absolutely gorgeous little number. Now, power creep is what happened to the T-44. The T-44 is not a bad tank. I'm going to show you two games today. I'm going to show you games by a couple of mates of mine, Psycho Vag and Lord Cantius, Andy, the big man from the UK. And they'll illustrate that, you know, with a little bit of luck and a little bit of love, you can still do really well on a T-44, but that's not why I'm talking about the tank. The game changes and the game gets balanced, and you'll also note that during this game I am consistently rejigging my controls because I'm trying to learn how to do the claw with 3 fingers now instead of 2, and yeah, anyway, I digress. The game changes. There were changes to premium ammunition, which I think were really positive for the game overall, but they killed this tank's mad skills in terms of it's got a 100mm gun and it's got 7 degrees of gun depression. And what it could do was pump promo, and that meant it did full damage, and it didn't take any, you know, it didn't take a beating in the DPM stakes when all the shots were going in. And that changed a lot for the T-44. And then there was the introduction of other tanks prior to that were just better than the T-44. The Type 59, for instance, is another 100mm toting Russian type medium. It's Chinese, but it's the same kind of gun, 100mm gun with 280 average hour for about the same DPM, the same gun depression, a much better turret, stronger tank all round. I feel the Type 59 than the T-44. I don't think I'll get a lot of argument from people about that. But then you've got the other 100mm Russian monster at this tier, the T-54 Mod 1, the T-54 first prototype. And what about the Type 54 lightweight, which is a light tank with all of those bells and whistles? As good an armor profile as the T-44, but 70 kilometers an hour, light tank camo, and yeah, a much better turret. Well, you can see what I mean, and that's before you take into account the fact that other tanks were introduced to the game that really made life tough for the T-44. There was a lot of big, nasty Tier 8 heavies brought into the game that's changed the complexion of the tier, and all these tanks around it have been buffed. Panthers have been buffed. The Super Pershing is now absolutely enormous and tough to deal with. And you got tanks coming in like, and this is just the AMX M449 that came in recently, and all these tanks keep getting better and better. And that leaves a tank like the T-44 that really hasn't had a buff ever, wallowing behind. And they go from tanks that were once dominant to tanks that are now really just making up the numbers at the tier. And it's not that they can't be driven well. I'm not saying that for a second. I'm just saying that this is not half the tank it used to be. And that's not because of the statistics of the tank. They haven't really changed. It's because of the statistics of all the tanks around it. Some of you might remember that Skate Extreme, my mate Skate, went on and on like a pork chop about the mouse, the micro mouse, the Panzer 2J at Tier 2. And he did because the tank was just broken at that tier. It was a tank that did not struggle at all. It destroyed everything and all before it. And Wargaming seems to have buffed every other tank in that tier, brought them up above the poverty line, and power creeped that tank out of its position as the #1 seal clubber in the world. And that's what's happened here for the T-44. So if you're looking at a tank in your garage that you used to cane in, that used to be the most dominant monster in the world, and that the T-54 would be another one where that's still an exceptionally good tank. I think the 54 is a really good tank, but is it the OP heat-firing monster it once was? Well, no, it's not. And is that bad for the game? Well, probably not, but it's bad for the T-54. I feel for the T-44 though, because it was never dominant. It wasn't the #1 in the tier or anything. It was in a tier that had a lot of really solid tanks, and it was in a tier where if you were clever with the tank, you were the only one who had that kind of Russian upper glacis, and you could move out sideways like this and get shots and watch out for people putting incoming fire and try and get your angles right and bounce them off that upper glacis. And there wasn't really anyone else capable of doing that. And then along came the Type 59, and then along came the T-44 Mod 1, and the T-44 100, and the T-54 Lightweight, and the T-34-2, and the T-34-3, and the T-34-1 at the tier below you, and you get the message. It's like, meh, now you're just one of the vanilla gorillas. You're just nothing spectacular, nothing beautiful. It's a bit of a shame, really. And I wonder, with a tank like the T-44, if they'll pick it up off the ground and turn it into something beautiful again. I wonder what that would mean. Because this is really a zero-sum equation, guys. If a whole bunch of heavies get really good, then a whole bunch of mediums are probably going to suffer. And it's the nature of balance. If you've got a whole bunch of really amazingly OP lights, like you did when the Russian lights came out, that can tear everything apart, then they're going to do really well and everything else in the tier is going to suffer. There's no accident that you get lots and lots of people driving IS-5s and IS-3 Defenders and T-54 Mod 1s and these kind of tanks. It's because they do really, really well. And it's their turn to be in the top of the tree, in the sunshine, getting their little bit of Lebensraum. And that means someone else has to suffer. At the moment, the 44 is definitely trending down. It's not one of my favourite tanks. It was once upon a time my go-to medium at tier 9, but there are a lot of tanks I take over it now as medium tanks at tier 9. Hell, I'd take the T-54 Lightweight every day of the week over this tank. And that's not even a medium tank, that's a light tank. And tanks like the Super P are just absolutely phenomenally good at all kinds of different parts of the battlefield now. And the 44, for me, just can't hold a candle to them. That's not to say that I won't ever drive it again, but if I have to pick something to try and get a win in, it's sure as hell not going to be the T-44. And I drove it on stream recently, and I've got to say I was pretty colour me unimpressed. It was just very, very mundane. And that's a bit of a shame because it was such an interesting vehicle to drive. And it did offer something very, very different. I think we all forget about how far the game has come. Power creep happens in every game, and it's not a bad thing because it does mean that they're tinkering, that they're balancing, that they're working on the best possible option or group of options for a game. And this is the developers I'm talking about there is the Royal We. Wargaming balance tanks. They nerf, they buff, they move tanks modules around, they work on the game mechanics. And these things they have a real visible and visceral effect on tanks like the 44 or any of the other SEAL clubs. Like the IS-3 was once upon a time the preeminent knife fighter and brawler of tier 8 heavies, and now there's like 1,000 different variants of an IS-3 and an IS-3 Defender and an IS-5, and you want the IS-6 and the IS-2SH and the Glacial and the WZ and blah 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 blah. And it's like, man, the game changes, and we want that change. We always want balance, but we want new tanks. We want tanks that do different things, and it's very, very hard, I think, to realistically find a consistently unique and new and innovative way of presenting the same old thing, which is basically a binary number of hitboxes on top of a pair of tracks and changing the numbers. And we forget that there has to be some kind of limitation to what can be put in. And I'm not getting involved in all the pros and the cons of wargaming and crates and all that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. Good game there, by the way, Andy. Pulling it out right at the wire with the little brawl on the KV4. Lord Candius from Grump. A little bit of home cooking there. Thanks very much. Let's get back to Powercreep, though. So let's talk about a couple of things that Powercreep does to your garage. Number one, it means if you're a player who likes to play particular tanks, not so much for the challenge, and this is everyone, pretty much everyone. There's only a few humans out there I know of who purposely play the Churchill gun carrier or the freaking T-95, but because of the challenge. Most people want to play these tanks because they're good win rates. They do more damage. They win more games. It's fun to win a lot. It's fun to do a lot of damage. It's fun to do these things. People don't play the 183 because it's super effective. They play it because they can do whopping big ass amounts of one-shot type damage, and that makes them, you know, extraordinarily happy. Rolls their socks up and down and floats their boat. There's a super purging. Love a bit of super P in the morning. The super purging is a perfect example of this. That tank was just horrible. For the longest time, it was such a rough tank. It didn't really do anything to anyone. The penetration was horrible. Everyone could fire Premo. It saw +2, -2 matchmaking, which meant, you know, you were running into monsters. And the game changed. And the Super P was the recipient of buffs. It got penetration buffs, it got DPM buffs. The Lurva was the same. The Lurva got buffed and buffed and buffed and buffed until now we see them as very, very strong vehicles. And this is interesting because if you're buffing those tanks, then everything else has to go down. Which just makes sense. Like, there's no way everything is going to stay the same when you move the numbers around. But where was I? So if you're playing those tanks to win and other tanks get better and premium ammunition starts doing less damage and binoculars disappear from the game, that has a really big effect on the way your garage looks. I think that's fair enough because I was there for the great T-44 winning every single game, running around, being better than most of the tier 10s you were playing against, fiasco. And the T-54 was a complete and utter joke. And the game changes really brought it back into line with reality. It got a lot harder to play that tank. In fact, it got impossible. You couldn't play it like you used to play it, where it would have heat that went through everything. It would do just as much DPM as just about every tank in the game. It never really got hit because its armor profile was ridiculous and off the charts, and it got balanced back, and that brought everything else around it back up. And the power creep never stops. It never stops. And I think people don't understand that if it did stop, if they finally got everything in perfect balance and all the tanks kind of went the same and they just stopped the clocks, the game would suck. The game would really suck. Like, we don't really want to get what we want, because that is not what we need, to paraphrase the Rolling Stones and turn it around and put it into a whole other idea. What we want and what we need are two very, very different things. What we want is balance and parity and a dynamic game where everything moves around and does really, really well. What we need is more tanks that can one-shot other tanks, because apparently we like them. And even in our heart of hearts, when in the darkest reaches of the night, we look at the scoreboard and think, gee, I really enjoyed playing that 183 today. I mean, I'll admit, there have been times where I've played the 183 and I've enjoyed it. So that's Powercreep, guys. The T-44 is a tank that I really think has suffered from it. See what you think. Tell me what other tanks you think have been power creeps. Maybe we can have a look at them, compare them to how they used to be and how they are nowadays. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think, and we can go from there. Maybe make a bit of a series about tanks that have really slid down the graph over the last couple of years. I'm Bushka on Blitz. Look after yourselves, boys and girls, and until next time, stay safe on the battlefield. Bye for now.